Now let's jump ahead a year to 1956, to an event that also shaped my future life. DC Comics was publishing a title called Showcase, in which every issue would showcase a new concept in comics. Well, they did 3 rather uninspired, dull issues of animals in the wild and firefighters and so on. But with the 4th issue, they decided that they would make an attempt to revitalize the superhero. Superheroes had faded from interest and mostly were replaced by comics in many different genres like war, western, romance, and so forth. So DC rebooted The Flash, and The Flash was in a brand new costume, new identity, and he was very exciting, very dynamic. But part of the origin story, drawn by Carmine Infantino and Joe Kubert, featured the character Barry Allen reading a copy of Flash Comics, which was the Golden Age Flash Comics, which had the old Golden Age Flash with the red shirt with the lightning bolt and the Mercury tin hat with the wings on it. I saw that and I remember the Flash. Yeah, he was in the Justice Society with Green Lantern and all that. Wow, I really miss that stuff. It's gone. So, but now we have a new Flash, and 2 or 3 panels that gave me a glimpse in the past. So I think this is what sparked me to seriously think about art and comic books as a career, because then I took it upon myself, drawing on my memory, to draw the Green Lantern, to draw Dr. Fate, Black Canary, whose name I didn't remember. I called her the Black Phantom. And of course, I got the costumes wrong. Green Lantern, I got pretty close to the way it was. But my 2 favorite characters of the Justice Society was Green Lantern and Dr. Midnight. So I did Dr. Midnight, and it would be a couple years later on down the road that DC would also revive the Green Lantern and the Justice Society, now calling them the Justice League, which were made of contemporary characters that were not in the original Justice Society. But they also brought back the Golden Age Flash, creating an Earth 2 where today's Flash would go into another dimension and have adventures with the Golden Age Flash. So that also led to the revival of a Golden Age Justice Society. So once again, I saw that there was a Green Lantern and Flash and Dr. Midnight and Hawkman. So I think that was the compelling thing, that Showcase number 4 was what really got me started on wanting to do comic books. And I by this time, my drawing had gotten a lot better, and I was working on white paper, and I was doing things in ink and coloring them with colored inks. I used a crow quill pen, and I was very frustrated by the fact that my drawings were rough-hewn compared to what was printed in a comic book. Comic book line work was very slick, and I could never get those kind of lines with a crow quill pen. It wasn't until much later, in the early 60s, that when I was an art student at Florida State, that I bought Spider-Man Annual #1. In it had a section by artist Steve Ditko, How I Draw Spider-Man. And yes, he used a crow quill pen, but mostly he did everything with a brush. A brush? How can you draw with a brush? You paint with a brush, but you don't draw with a brush. I just couldn't fathom that. And I think he said he used the #6 brush. So immediately I went over to the art store in Tallahassee by Florida State and looked at the art supplies, and I saw brushes, and I saw number 6 brush was a pretty fat brush. So how could you get those tiny little lines with a number 6 brush? So I ended up buying a 0 brush or something small like that, and I took it back to where I lived, and I started dipping the brush into ink and started inking my pencil lines with a brush, and quickly became fairly proficient at it. And I was amazed, and at last I could get a nice slick clean line like I saw in the newspaper strips and comic books. So one of my projects I did I majored in advertising design. I did a comic book. I did a complete 24-page comic book. I also learned from the Ditko piece, another major mistake I was doing. I was drawing comic books actual size. Well, comic books are really drawn much larger. I guess at that time they were drawn on 11 by 17 inch paper like they are today, but prior to that they were drawn on like 13 by 18 inch. They're much larger. And the Sunday newspaper strips were drawn on really big boards. So that was my impetus there. Also, while I was at Florida State, of course, the classes I took, there was no such thing as a cartooning class, and all my instructors and professors frowned on cartoon art. But one day, as I was going to a sweet shop across from the campus, I saw a young man with a folding table set up in front of the building, and he had a stack of magazines there. And this was a fellow named Bill Killeen, who had come up from Austin, Texas. He formerly was of the University of Texas, and he had started a magazine, which was a college humor magazine entitled The Charlatan. Now, Florida State had its own college humor magazine called Smoke Signals, but it was tightly controlled by the administration, and there were certain things that you were not allowed to do in the Smoke Signals. And Killeen had come up with this idea, which was brilliant, that he would do a magazine that was published off campus, and he would take this magazine and tour the universities of the southeastern United States. And he'd set up his stand, and he'd hawk his copies of Charlatan for 50 cents a piece. So in The Charlatan was the wonderful humor strip Wonder Warthog. It so happens that Killeen was a co-creator with Gilbert Shelton of Wonder Warthog. So Brother Rat, I immediately bonded with him, and I started talking to him, and I told him I was an artist and all that, and he was interested, and that maybe I could do some stuff for him. And of course I wanted to do Wonder Warthog, but no, he was using strips that were originally printed in the Texas Ranger, which I believe was the college humor magazine of the University of Texas that he was affiliated with. So he had a backlog of Gilbert's Wonder Warthog stories. He wanted me to mainly draw ads, and how he got the money to do his magazine, he would go to local communities, and he would sell ads to the local businesses. Like in Tallahassee, it was Chinello's Pizza, and I would do a series of ads for Chinello's Pizza, and I would do. He hired me to do this, and we became affiliated and buddies, and it was an exciting experience because it was completely illegal what he was doing, and it was against the law, and he was constantly running afoul with the local constabulary, who didn't want him peddling his books on the street of Tallahassee. He was not allowed to physically go onto the Florida State campus, so he was always just right across the street, so students coming and going in the main entrances would pass by his stand. So he sold these local ads to get enough money to pay for the printing on the book. So eventually I became so embedded with Killeen that I became the associate editor of the magazine, and I learned at his elbow the nuts and bolts of how you put together a magazine, which was invaluable to me when I started later Paragon Publications. Killeen had layout paper, and he would use press type and typeset columns that he would paste up to form the pages of the magazine. And I guess a lot of the artwork I had to draw actual size to paste up on this. Other things he would have to take to a printing place to have reduced to fit in. And he would also cut words out of existing magazines and use that as headlines on some of the features and advertisements. And I did that later with Paragon. I used headings from avant-garde magazines like Evergreen and things that would be called progressive today, which were artsy magazines that appealed more to the artists and creative people. So it was a wonderful learning experience with Killeen, and we had a lot of adventures. I went with him going to LSU and various different universities where he would drop off the magazines, and he had people that would sell them in these different locations. And we ended up at the Mardi Gras where, of course, we didn't have any money, so we slept in the car, but we enjoyed the Mardi Gras, and I took photographs. I was also one of the photographers for the feature for the Charlatan, and we did an article on the Mardi Gras. And back in Tallahassee, he was always running afoul of the police, and he had to hide out for a while, so he actually came to live with me and my roommate. We had a house rented a mile or so from the FSU campus, and Killeen stayed with us for a couple of weeks while he was hot. And of course, I was listed as the associate editor in the magazine, and I was a student registered at Florida State. Now, if cops had any brains, they could have gone to the registrar's office and find out where this guy lived and gone to at least check him out, and he then could have found, the police officer could have found Killeen hiding out at my place. But they never did, so we continued on, and eventually they ran out of Wonder Warthog stories. And I never got to draw a Wonder Warthog strip, but I did draw him on the cover, and I draw him in ads and all that. And that was a kick for me. But I thought maybe I can come up with a strip that could replace Wonder Warthog. And this was like 1966. And I graduated in December of 1966. And I was working on a story that I was going to do for the Charlatan called The Girl from LSD. And you AC Comics and Paragon fans now realize that this was the start of Paragon. I drew that first story. It must have been in 66 and 67. It never got to the Charlatan because I graduated in December and was drafted by April of 1967. So I was out of the picture. And Killeen, as it happened, he also stopped publishing. He had the distinction of having the first college humor magazine to have a nude centerfold. He got a young co-ed from University of Florida named Pam Brewer, and she posed. I was not the photographer that got to photograph Pam, unfortunately, but I did photograph other girls clothed in bikinis and whatnot for their Girl of the Issue. But Killeen had gotten together with Pam and decided he would move to Gainesville while she finished school, and he started a head shop, again ahead of the curve. That would be in 66 or 67, right before all the hippie stuff really came big into play. So he was on track with that. So the charlatan was no more.